It is my great pleasure to introduce Roberto, today's speaker. So Roberto obtained his PhD at University of Geneva, and then he was a postdoc at the Oxford University. After that, he was a staff member at Imperial College London since 2008. And then in 2020, he moved to SISSA in Trieste, where he became the head of the theoretical and scientific data science group. So Roberto works a lot in data science and machine learning. Since many years ago, he was one of the pioneers in applying it to science. And together with that, he's also excellent science communicator. So he did many things, including public speeches, but most notably, he wrote 2 books, one in 2014, The Edge of the Sky, and one just last year in 2023, the book called Starborn. So that book received many recognitions and prizes. For example, it was Book of the Week at BBC. It was one of the best books for new scientists, and so on and so forth. So now I will have a pleasure to hear Roberto talking on Promethean vision of AI. Sorry, go ahead, Roberto.
Thank you, Gabi. Good afternoon, everybody. Great pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Today, I want to talk about AI, but I want to sort of take not the sort of the big vision. I want to take the cosmological vision of AI. Where are we going, and where it's coming from, actually. And we will discover, I think, that the origin of the concepts underlying modern artificial intelligence is unsuspectedly coming actually from the stars. When we think about AI, we often think about something like this. Our sort of imaginary collective has been shaped by Hollywood movies, at least here in the Western part of the world, where AI or ante litteram AI is embodied into some sort of nasty creatures, nasty robots, starting from the 1927 movie Metropolis from Fritz Lang, one of the great classic of cinema, where a woman actually gets transformed into a robot and thereby wreak havocs in the city. Or more recent, close to us, movies like The Terminator, where we have this entity, which is again some sort of artificial entity that travels through time, or even things like Blade Runner, where we have these replicants who are perhaps artificial beings created by men, by humans, that then revolt against their creators. So this, in a way, has always shaped the way we imagine AI or created intelligences, in particular embodied intelligences. But of course, there is another way of looking at this, which is the disembodied version of AI, which we carry basically in our pockets nowadays. And that also has been for a long time a staple of our collective science fiction, but also our collective imagination from 2001 Space Odyssey, where the infamous HAL takes control of the ship, to the more recent and very quite actually contemporary movie, Her, which is a movie from 2013, which in many ways already foresees many of the developments that we're only seeing actually happening in reality now with things like ChatGPT and things like Transcendence, where the story is about a crazy scientist uploading his mind onto the cloud, and then, of course, everything goes wrong, as you might imagine. So that's the AI of Hollywood, the AI that somewhere is in the back of our mind, but the AI that we have today is of a somewhat different kind, but nevertheless a pervasive kind. So the kind of machine learning methods that power recommendation systems of the kind that we find everywhere online, from things that recommend us our next purchase, our next movie, our next video, or our next music track. Those things are powered by machine learning systems that have learned from our data and are now predicting the future, predicting what we might like, and oftentimes also nudging us subtly in ways that perhaps we are not fully aware of. It's the kind of technology that promises to drive our cars, and at any point in time when you ask, driverless cars are always 2 years in the future, no matter when you ask. So this might remain in the future for another while, because in fact, this technology is not quite as ready as many people or people who are investing in it are trying to make us believe. But if you look, this is an example of societal changes that are driven by machine learning AI systems. But also if you look across to the sciences, for example, science sciences are being revolutionized by the use of new methods based on machine learning that are now solving tasks that were considered classically with statistical and computational methods of before the machine learning revolution were considered unsolvable or essentially unfeasible within a finite computational time. One of the prime examples is AlphaFold, a code developed by Google DeepMind, which is able to predict the way 3D folding of proteins, which is a very, very difficult problem computationally. And in just 1 year, it was able to essentially revolutionize the field by solving this problem that before was essentially unfeasible. And this is now one of the main, this and other advances are one of the main ways in which machine learning is completely changing with the way we do not just drug research, but also biology, material science, and many other fields in science. I'll tell you a little bit more about my own field of expertise, which is cosmology, in a minute. But also, in all kind of practical applications, all of this is fast rippling through society. There is now promise of AI doctors able to diagnose skin cancer, for example, better than the experts, or the possibility of just taking a picture of somebody's eye and then from that automatically diagnose conditions earlier than human doctor could be able to do. So all sorts of potentially revolutionary treatments and opportunities for better medical care are being now touted to be brought about by AI systems. And of course, do I need to mention ChatGPT, which in only a year and a half has changed the way many of us do, whatever task we need to do in our day-to-day, from writing a text to doing homework if you're at school, from writing your thesis, perhaps, or papers, even to summarizing research. In recent work we done with a graduate student of mine, we went through the abstracts on the archive, so the website that collects scientific papers before they're peer-reviewed. And through statistical analysis, we found quite significant change in the frequency of certain words that appear to have changed very significantly in frequency just after December 2022, which is when ChatGPT was introduced. And so, in fact, one of the things that we discovered is that if you use a lot the word significant, then there is a significant probability that you're using ChatGPT, or perhaps that you've been using ChatGPT enough that your own way of expressing yourself has become ChatGPT-like. And so all of this is all around us. None of this yet is of the kind that we saw before. None of this is threatening our lives yet. But of course, all of this potential, all of this great technology comes with the darker side, darker potential applications. For example, facial recognition and surveillance in general. The fact that all of our data, be it facial recognition in the street, be it the stuff that we buy on the internet, the sites we visit, our own biometric data. If you have a smartwatch, that's a lot of data you're giving up for free to the cloud, wherever the cloud is, and that gets sold on. And we're really oftentimes unaware of how many data we're giving away to mostly private corporations, also governments. And that is bringing about what Zsuzsanna Zuboff has termed the the surveillance capitalism, the fact that our data are the new oil, the new form of power that we are mostly giving up for free for the convenience of all the products that the companies are selling us. And that is very, very problematic. There are many, many ways in which, for example, privacy can be very, very strongly impacted by machine learning systems that are able, for example, to reconstruct gender, economic status, ethnicity, just from very sparse data points, even anonymized data points. Those machine learning systems are not powerful enough that they can reconstruct very private information about people. And we can think of a number of examples, for example, homosexuality in countries where this is banned, or abortion and pregnancy in countries like the US where this is becoming under fire. And in general, our privacy in our democratic countries is being steadily eroded by the intrusion and the ability of machine learning of learning from data points that we think are harmless. Another example, a recent study has found that just 1 minute of data from one of those devices that you use to game online, those devices that measure the position of your body in order for you to be able to interact with a game without a console, without a terminal, those biometric data are very, very personal. So they're just as good as having your fingerprint. And so you can imagine that if you have enough data of gamers, which are collected as they play in their home, just from 1 minute of those data, you can reconstruct this person's identity with 95% accuracy. So you can imagine walking down the street and just being recognized by not just facial recognition, but just the way you walk, which is personal to you. So very, very difficult and very, very subtle ways all these systems are impacting our lives. I don't want to talk about the horrible usage of machine learning in autonomous lethal weapons, which really ought to be banned, but that's another direction in which these autonomous systems powered by AI are being used. And some of this we are seeing at play in current war scenarios where targeting of people, not necessarily with autonomous weapons, but the selection of people where to target, when to strike has been done reportedly using machine learning systems. All of which has got, like I said, dark sides, positive sides, but also important conundrums for the way we want to use this technology to shape society. Here are other examples of subtle but all-pervasive dangers of machine learning applications in real life. Here is an example from commercial software from a few years back, facial recognition software, where you see that the overall percentage of accuracy of recognition of faces very much depends on whether you are a white male, in which case the software works almost perfectly for you, but very, very much more poorly if you are a dark-skinned female. And so this is both a gender and a racial bias, which was discovered in 2019 by researchers at the MIT Media Lab, which is, if not pervasive, is a very important problem of machine learning systems that, by definition, learn from experience. And oftentimes, as we shall see, the data over which those systems are trained are historical data, and those data contain gender bias, stereotypical bias, racial bias. And once those biases are baked into the machine learning systems, their prediction will be affected by them. And so the errors and the stereotypes and the mistakes and the biases of the past are being baked into a very powerful technology, which will perpetuate them further into the future at scale, which is a huge danger. The same is true for, AI doctors. Yes, AI doctors can perform better than the average doctor if you got white skin, but if you're darker skinned, they perform worse because there are perhaps the training set on which those systems have been trained hasn't seen so many dark-skinned patients. The same is true for credit scoring and mortgage applications. Again, biases against certain socioeconomic people, strata of the population are being perpetuated and baked into automated system for credit scoring, for mortgage applications, for CV sifting, for job applications, and so on and so forth. And if we go back to ask the question, but where does it all come from? And later we will ask the question, why does it happen now? Why didn't it happen 50 years ago or 20 years ago or 100 years ago? We'll see later. The traditional way, the story of where all of these almost magical capabilities of AI comes from starts somewhere in the 1950s. And so the traditional or the standard lore is that this idea of machine learning that we now enjoy in our smartphones today really goes back to a few people, and some of them are I want to mention here. One of them being, of course, Alan Turing, a British mathematician who was instrumental, for example, in breaking the Enigma code during the war, and then after the war tragically died in unclear circumstances. The official report is suicide, but he had been subjected to a mandatory chemical castration course of medicine by the UK government for being homosexual, which was at the time it was outlawed in England. He was very depressed, so the coroner said suicide by ingestion of poison, but it's not entirely clear whether this was the case or not. Be as it might, in 1950 or thereabouts, Turing had some groundbreaking idea, and one of these ideas he expounded in a lecture in February 1950 here in Piccadilly. That's Piccadilly Circus at the seat of what is now the Royal Astronomical Society, the Royal Geographical Society, the Royal Academy. At the time, this was the seat of the London Mathematical Society. And we know that this was a highly anticipated lecture because the audience was full of mathematicians. And in that lecture, Turing brought forward an incredible idea. And the idea was, at the time where computers were something like this, remember? So we had, the kind of computers we have today hadn't been invented. So this is the 1948, I think, top of the range computer machine at the University of Cambridge, which was, a behemoth of valves and electric devices. There was no electronic computation yet. So at the time, where computers looked like this, they worked with punch cards in and out. There was no screen, there was no terminal. Turing comes up with this incredible suggestion. Why don't we actually try to build a machine that can learn from experience? Rather than programming a machine with punch cards, we're going to program the machine in such a way that the machine will learn from experience, just like humans do. We will start with a blank slate, and then as more data come in, the machine will attempt to achieve its target, the target the goal that we set to the machine, and through an appropriate course of punishments and rewards, Turing said, we are going to punish the mistakes for the machine, and we're going to reward good strategies in such a way that, exposed to sufficient amount of training, just like children, Turing said, do, the machine will grow up and will develop into something like the adult brain. So rather than programming computers just to go from A to B with a set of the instructions, Turing wanted computers to learn by themselves, which is the foundational idea of machine learning. Of course, none of this could be realized with this, but already in 1956, this idea was exciting mathematicians, neuroscientists, computer scientists, who, after the development of the electronic calculator, began to see potential in Turing's idea and potential to translate them into practical working scenarios. And there's a famous conference, a Dartmouth conference in 1956, which brought together a bunch of white men, as you can see, so not very diverse crowd. Some of them very famous, that would go on and already had done great things in computer science, mathematics, and so on, including Claude Shannon, him of the Shannon entropy, Marvin Minsky, very famous, and John McCarthy, of course, and many others. And they came up because they were making a funding application to the government to get enough money to get these people here to Dartmouth for the summer. They made an application for a 2-month, 10-month study of artificial intelligence. And that's one of the first times, it's not the first time, in fact, the name artificial intelligence had been coined by a woman, a researcher, a couple of years before, but the history went down when it was used by 10 men. Artificial intelligence as a way of stimulating interest in the funding bodies, it felt like this was a buzzword that could catch on, and it did catch on. They wanted to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. So they wanted essentially to create a human brain, and they thought that advance in one or more of these problems can be done in a carefully selected group of scientists if they work together on it for a few months. Of course, that didn't quite work out like that. Nevertheless, the name stuck. And by 1958, this was all the rage. And this man, Frank Rosenblatt, a psychologist, actually built machines that were supposed to electrical signals were supposed to replicate the neurons, the working of neurons inside the brain insofar as he understood them. And he got a lot of money from defense agencies. Here again, we see the connection between defense and machine learning, certainly early on, still today. So much so that in 1958, the New York Times said, after Rosenblatt got a big grant from the government, from the Navy particularly, the Navy revealed the embryo of an electronic computer today that it expects will be able to walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself, and be conscious of its existence, which is not a small list of things. And they think that this thing called the perceptron will be able to read and write, and it's expected to be finished in about a year at the cost of $100,000. Okay, it didn't quite work out. We all submit funding applications where we say, we're going to do all of this, just give us the money, you'll see. Okay, it took 60 years, but they actually got there, except for the reproduce itself, which we'll come back to in a minute. But, read, write, talk, understand, translate languages. This is ChatGPT, isn't it? So this was already in the aim of these people in 1958. Because all of this didn't lead to all of these advances, multiple so-called AI winters came along. Research not just stalled, just crashed because nobody believed them anymore after they didn't deliver. And so AI research went through a number of such AI winters, and then new hope and new stimulus until the recent history we all know. So that's sort of the history of AI. But I want to take you now on a different journey. I want to take you a little bit to the prehistory of AI and explore with you a set of ideas and happenings that perhaps are not so well known. What I just told you now, it's everywhere on the internet, of course. And this is a bit different because I want to now investigate a little bit further where this foundational idea of prediction and the ability to predict the world from data and from past experience actually comes from. Of course, Turing articulated it in 1950, but the root of the idea goes much deeper than that. And our story in that context starts on March the 4th, 1837, when a young but already well-traveled naturalist walked up the stairs of number 7 Dorset Street, this mansion here in the heart of one of the fancy neighborhoods of London, still today, Marylebone. And this young naturalist, you might have guessed it, was none other than Charles Darwin, who had just returned or recently returned from his 5 years trip around the world aboard the Beagle. Darwin was absolutely thrilled to be attending this particular party on that Saturday night, because this was not just any party. This was a party thrown by this man, Charles Babbage, about whom more in a minute. But in letters to his sister, Darwin was telling how excited he was to be going to the most fancy soiree in London, where all the literary people were there, or the scientists were there, although they were not called scientists yet because the word had not been invented yet. All the politicians, all the powerful men, the aristocracy, lady in long gowns, salmon, caviar, all, the real party was there. And in fact, Darwin also said, and apparently there is a great deal of beautiful ladies as well. So it was obviously an eligible bachelor looking for a future wife. And the party was thrown by this man, Charles Babbage, British mathematician, scion of a banker, so very wealthy. At that time, he was the Lucasian professor of mathematics at the University of Cambridge, the chair that had been Newton's. So really one of the top academics in the country, and launched on a career that in a few years he would completely throw away. He would completely destroy his own career. He would completely destroy his own life. Indeed, he would completely destroy his own fortune in pursuit of an obsessive idea, an idea that he had picked up very early on in his youth when he was a student at Cambridge and interacting with a number of other students, including the astronomer Herschel. And so Babbage, in 1837, when he presumably met, although we don't have direct evidence of their meeting, we have indirect evidence that Darwin and Babbage actually met at these soirees, and perhaps even that Darwin thinking about evolution was influenced by Babbage's thinking about computation. And in fact, the story of how Babbage came to do what I'll tell you in a minute goes back to about 1820. At that point in time, remember, this is now Victorian England. The Industrial Revolution is full ahead, is going full ahead, and all of society is being very rapidly mechanized. And with the mechanization, with the industrialization, with factory output and production, what people need all of a sudden is great precision of calculation that had been long important for astronomical navigation, of course, as you can imagine. No GPS at those times. If you wanted to fix your position at sea, you could do so using watches in the 19th century, but earlier on you had to do it by looking at the stars and finding the position of the moon with respect to the stars and doing elaborate calculations. So numerical tables such as this were to be found in the captain's cabin on board of ships because they needed these tables to calculate their position. They were found on bankers' desks because they needed them to compute annuities, on insurance brokers, engineers, architects, you name it, right? Whoever needed calculation couldn't do it on a phone, couldn't do it even on a mechanical calculator. They had to rely on tables, numerical tables of logarithms, trigonometric functions, you name it. And those themselves had been computed by hand using only a sliding rule as a computing aid to 6 figures precision. There were thousands of these volumes. Babbage had a collection of 3,400 volumes of numerical tables, so obsessed he was with them. And he was particularly obsessed by the fact that those tables were full of errors because they'd been computed by hand. As obviously, people were fallible. And so one night in 1820, Babbage and Herschel, the astronomer, were sitting together and they were comparing numerical tables about astronomical position of the moon. And they were finding error upon error upon error. And Babbage, in the way he recounted the story later on, although it's not clear whether he came up with the idea or Herschel did, Babbage said, "I wish those numbers had been computed by steam." And so he set out to do that. He set out to mechanize, to transform the computation of numerical tables from being a laborious by hand enterprise into something that could be done mechanically, automatically, automated computation. And he started obsessing about this idea and put all of his efforts, all of his resources into developing a scheme which was called the difference engine, by which those numbers, those logarithms, and those trigonometric functions could be computed essentially just by turning a wheel. And a very elaborate system of numbers and pulleys and various bits and pieces would rotate in such a way to give you in output the desired function. So for those of you more interested into the details, the difference engine was based on the idea that if you take a polynomial and you differentiate it n times, a polynomial order n, you get a constant. And so from that you can build back up the original polynomial. And this simple idea had been translated by Babbage into the scheme of a machine that would be able to actually compute those trigonometric functions and logarithms automatically. Now, Babbage worked for 10 years on this idea, also got prizes, vast government sums were spent on this project, but at some point it all fell apart. And it all fell apart because Babbage was a terrible character. He was very arrogant, he couldn't possibly get along with people, and at some point he just fired the one engineer who was the only one able to actually build this kind of machine to the desired level of precision. Imagine, this is a fragment, the only fragment remaining from the original machine, which was much bigger and which would have encompassed thousands of pieces, all made by hand, with Victorian technology to very high precision. And so the project foundered, and Babbage never actually completed it because he said, okay, enough, I don't want to work with you anymore, and the project just fell apart, and it was never completed. Ada Lovelace, which is recorded in history as the first computer programmer, since she wrote a program that ought to have been executed by Babbage's machine. She was famously impressed by Babbage's genius and what she termed his thinking machines. So really, those machines which Babbage demonstrated at the parties, several of which Darwin actually attended, were all the rage in Victorian London because they seemed to herald a new era, an era of automatic computation, an era in which machines could do something that until then only the human mind could have been able to achieve, namely computing something, which was incredible to the eye of the Victorians. Once the difference engine floundered, Babbage threw himself to another project actually, that he termed the, not the difference engine, but the general engine. And this engine here was supposed to be able to do any kind of computation. It had a CPU, what we now would term a CPU. It had memory banks. It had input-output terminals. In fact, this scheme here was a scheme for a general-purpose calculator that, of course, was never accomplished because that project never was built, remained purely on paper. But if it had been built, imagine what Victorian England would have been with a computer, with what we now would call a computer. That never came to pass because mostly Babbage's own character flaws. But what's interesting is that in the 200th anniversary of Babbage's birth in 1991, a team at the Science Museum in London took out all of the plans that Babbage had devised for the difference engine and built a copy using only technology that Babbage could have used in his time and using Babbage's very own plans. And when they cranked the wheel, it worked exactly as intended. So it could have built a computer in 1835, but it failed to do so, and this is how beautiful it might have looked if that had been the case. So that sort of brings us to the question of, what is computation for, and can computation, which was the hallmark of a human ingenuity and human capability for thinking, could it be embodied in a machine, which is what Babbage tried to achieve. But Babbage himself had been strongly influenced by this man, Pierre-Simon de Laplace, which many of you will have heard of, one of the great intellectual heroes of the scientific revolution, mathematician, physicist, astronomer, polymath, really Laplace genius has had a huge influence on astronomy, physics, and so on and so forth, mathematics. And Laplace in 1814 wrote in his treatise on probabilities, he wrote something really, really fundamental that Babbage was very well acquainted with and actually influenced his thinking about computation very much. Laplace wrote, given for one instant an intelligence which could comprehend all the forces by which nature is animated, an intelligence sufficiently vast to submit this data to analysis, it, the intelligence, would embrace in the same formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the lightest atom. For it, nothing will be uncertain, and the future as the past will be present to its eyes, which is the manifesto of positivism, if you want to put it like that. The idea that if you have enough data and you got the equations, you got enough capability of analyzing those data, the present can be predicted. From the present, you can predict the future, you can retrodict the past, everything is present to your eyes. It's an omniscient intelligence, effectively, that can know everything there is to know if you have sufficient data and sufficient capability of analyzing this data, which is very much what we see now in the modern form of AI that we've briefly encountered before. 200 years later, those forms of AI have taken another step, which is they forego the actual laws of nature that Laplace used, for example, to predict the future movement of the planets and the solar system bodies. In the modern version of AI, the one that we see deployed in our society, not the one that we use in science, forgoes all of that in favor of pure discovery of correlations and prediction based on data without an underlying theory. You don't need a theory of people's mind in order to predict that if you like that, you will like this, because now you know that your profile is very similar to this other profile, and what this other profile has done, you are very likely to do so too. And that idea of the power of data to predict the future goes back to Laplace, flows through Babbage, through Darwin, whose ideas about evolution were also very much influenced by this, and resurfaces in the 20th century, as we saw earlier. But then this brings us to the question of why now, right? If Laplace had already saw it all, if Babbage had already attempted to produce an embryonic form of what we might now call AI, although his AI wasn't data-driven, but was entirely deterministic, why do we get what we get in AI now? Well, all that we are seeing developed under our eyes, under our nose, is the confluence of three different spokes that need all to be present for modern AI to work. The first is the data, right? You just need an enormous amount of data to do the things that we discussed. And those data are now available thanks to the internet, thanks to mobile phones, thanks to all the devices we bring alongside with us, and that gathers up all the data that the AI training needs. Hardware is not a big part of the equation. Those are very compute-heavy tasks, and so to learn from experience, to crunch those data, you need very dedicated hardware, very fast hardware, or a specific kind that will be able to do the computation. And then, of course, you need the algorithms and the architectures, which also have been invented essentially in the last 10 years. Not all of them, but the things that, for example, power ChatGPT, these large language models, this has been invented in 2017. And so these three things, they come together now, and that's why we are seeing this exponential increase in the capabilities of AI. And that can be perhaps visualized on this graph, where you see here the number of free parameters inside the models, this various kind of large language models mostly. And here the number of number of petaflop operation that you need to train them, that's a logarithmic scale, and so is this. And you see this is an incredible rise in both the number of free parameters, the kind of knobs that you have inside the models, and the compute that's needed to train those models. The other thing I want you to notice in this graph is that all of the large models, the ChatGPTs and so forth, they're all red now, meaning they're being developed and trained by industry, because the industry and the big players in that industry are the only ones who have the data and the compute to do it. Academia is being very quickly left out because we don't have the data, and we certainly don't have the thousands and thousands of CPU or GPUs rather that this work requires. That's another interesting development of this area. In my own field of expertise, cosmology, the story is similar. This is the number of astronomical objects known to humanity as a function of time since the invention of the telescope in 1600. You can see that for a long time, nothing much changes because, yes, the telescope allows people to see more objects in the sky, but recording them still requires drawing them on paper. This changes in the 19th century with the discovery or the adoption of the photographic plate in astronomy, and things start picking up. But then in the early 2000s or in the late 1990s, the CCD camera is invented and applied to telescope, the same cameras that we have in our phones. And look at this exponential explosion of data. So much so that nowadays in cosmology, I can say that data are no longer the problem. The problem is how to crunch those data into meaningful science and meaningful knowledge. So we want to go from information to knowledge. And that's the bottleneck. And that's where AI of a slightly different kind than what is used often elsewhere can help us doing. So I won't talk too much about astronomy, but just to give you a sense for the scale of this data-driven enterprise that we are now facing. This is one of the new facilities that's going to come online at some point next year, the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile with a mirror 8.4 meters in diameter, which is probably the size of this room, more or less, right? Which is polished to a precision of a fraction of a nanometer. Will produce, with a camera of 3,000 megapixels, will produce 30 terabytes per night of data that will have to be crunched and analyzed using artificial intelligence. The Nuclear Space Telescope, as launched last year, is now gathering data already and will look at 10 billion sources in the sky, including 1 billion galaxies and 30 million positions of these galaxies in the sky in 3 dimensions. All of this data will need to be crunched, will need to be analyzed, and AI will certainly play a big role into this endeavor, and enabling us to extract the physical information of this data, to do so with confidence that we are actually including uncertainties in those models, and also looking at numerical simulations, for example, is another big area of application of AI in the future. I will skip the pretty movie, although it's very pretty. That's for another time, because I want to close in the last 6 minutes. Got me? Is that all right? Yeah, in the last 6 minutes, I want now to return to the present and actually look at the future. We've seen how, if not the modern version of AI, certainly the thinking behind the modern version of AI has got very deep roots that actually go back to Laplace. And Laplace was motivated in his thinking by astronomy. The idea of the intelligence that Laplace was thinking about was intelligence that he imagined could predict the motion of the astronomical bodies in the sky. And astronomy, or rather the universe, the cosmos, plays a big role in the future of AI as well, but in a strange, subtle way that I will try to illuminate. These 4 people are among, I think, the most influential people on Earth. Those are the leaders of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, which you all have heard about. And after the big smash hit that was ChatGPT, 100 million users after 3 months from rollout, nothing ever grew that fast in the history of the internet. Now they have a very big next mission. They're after AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, which is perhaps the stuff of dreams, perhaps the stuff of nightmares. Is the idea that the kind of AI that we have now, ChatGPT, can be evolved to a point that it will be super intelligent, and it will therefore exceed human capabilities. And once that happens, this is what Ray Kurzweiler has termed the singularity. Once the AI becomes more intelligent than us, and they are able to reprogram themselves, they become more intelligent exponentially, and we're very quickly left behind. And we stop to matter, okay? That's the dream. That is what OpenAI is pursuing next, AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, because they believe this is the necessary next step in the quest for, well, the one invention that will be the last invention that humankind ever needs to make. If we have AGI, then why worry about climate change? AGI will have the solution. If we have AGI, why worry about governing ourselves? Let AGI do it, and so on and so forth. There are other people in this race, very influential people you've heard about. This guy here doesn't need an introduction. Of course, he has been supported OpenAI in the early days, was thrown out from the board, then came back asking for a ban in the development of AI. If you remember a few years back, now he's back with his own AI development company. He's at the head of Neuralink, another company that is pursuing brain-machine interface. They recently implanted pigs with chips that make pigs able to communicate telepathically, quote unquote, and they're pursuing human experiments with the view of creating cyborgs. So people who will transcend the purely organic nature of our bodies to become some version of a mind, of a machine brain enhanced type of humankind. Think of them as humankind 2.0. That's the same philosophy behind Peter Thiel's investment in the Olympics on steroids, the idea that he wants to sponsor this new kind of Olympic Games where anything goes. There is no drug controls. Indeed, drug-enhanced athletes are what he's after. He wants to enhance the human body to the limit of the human body with no limit to what you can use, be it chemical, artificial, implantate, whatever, right? And he's trying to set this up. And then another figure which is very influential in this field is Nick Bostrom, a philosopher until recently at the University of Oxford, who has been very vocal in the past 10, 15 years about this idea of long-termism, the idea that we are doomed if we stay on this planet. And actually, us as a species should aim for the stars, and that's where the universe comes back in, should aim for the stars as a way of colonizing the universe, because his calculation goes, if we stay on this planet, our growth is limited. There's only so much space for all of us. Indeed, we're already running out of resources. But if we colonize the galaxy, his projections are that we could, in a few million of years' time, we could get to something like 10 to the 58 beings. Now, the calculation is called effective altruism, if you like. It's an extreme form of utilitarianism. So the idea is, if you can colonize a galaxy with 10 to the 58 sentient beings, be it humans or biological or non-biological entities or pure AIs, then if every one of these 10 to the 58 beings has got a positive life experience, that's a lot of positive life experiences out there in the far future, and that outweighs any danger or any suffering that we might cause onto ourselves in pursuing that goal. In other words, Bostrom, Musk, and this very special group of people strongly believe that any price in the short term is worth paying to colonize the stars, to spread to the stars in very large numbers, and those future large numbers of humans or post-humans, perhaps, will plenty make up for any problems or any death or any suffering that we and our children might endure in order to get there. And AGI is a big part of that equation, because with AGI, we can build spaceships and colonize the stars if we are not able to do so ourselves. We can go to Mars, like SpaceX is planning to do. Jeff Bezos has got a company called Blue Origin, which is paving the road to the stars so we can leave Earth behind. But of course, the reality is, all of this is a pie dream, is pie in the sky, right? Mars is like this. This is where we're coming from. There is, make no mistake, there is no B planet. Colonizing the stars, and let alone Mars, is an incredibly hard enterprise that, in my opinion, is actually detracting from the urgent needs and task that befalls on us here on Earth, which is, of course, facing climate change, lack of biodiversity, destruction of natural resources, and, well, all the wars and fights that we're seeing on our planet now. The stars are not an answer. They're just a red herring. They're just a decoy. This is just what these people believe might actually be the future of humankind. But our future is here on our planet. And if we follow this pipe dream of believing that our planet is expendable, and we can just leave it all behind, consumed by war and ravaged by climate change, and move to the stars, well, that's deluded. But unfortunately, this is not some people on Reddit saying this. This is very influential people with lots of money who are influencing politics, policies, technology at the very heart of artificial intelligence. And so I wanted to conclude by highlighting this triangle of interdependencies that is at the back of all of this, which is this idea that AGI and eventually transcending our own body to become non-biological, pure beings or pure software, or whatever you want to call it, or silicon-based, whatever you want, is one of the pillars towards this goal of transhumanism, this idea that we have to leave our organic self behind, that we can take our own evolution into our own hands and become something else. And of course, the question is, who's going to be left behind? Not everybody will become super powerful, right? And the other pillar is this long-termism, this idea of space imperialism and colonization, which is a modern guise of the old style imperialist colonialism, effectively, but now translated into the stars, powered by AGI and enabled by some version of human enhancement that borders and often actually falls into eugenetics, of which we've seen enough in the 1940s and during the Nazi and fascist regimes of the 20th century. I don't think this is the future we should build as society. And I don't think we should allow AI development to continue along those lines without us actually democratically having a say about, do we want any of this in our future? I want to end on this, a picture of Pandora. You remember the story? Prometheus stole the fire from the gods and gave it to humans. Zeus, enraged, sent Pandora, a woman made of clay, originally made of clay, to Earth, where the brother of Prometheus married her, and she brought back a jar, which then was reinterpreted as a box, which was forbidden. Don't open that jar. And Pandora did, and out of the jar came all the evils and all the bad things, the bad sentiment, the bad feelings that plague the world today, and only hope remained inside. I feel that we are poised with AI and all that this technology can bring forth into the world. I feel we are poised very much at this moment of opening the box, and let's see what might come out. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Roberto. Questions? Okay, maybe I can start just before thinking. So, you set up the problem that we are now in very well, but what do you think is the way sort of to deal with this exponential growth, motivation, capitalistic motivation to go the fast one can and one in this direction without any control? Like, what's the chance we stand actually to think about these things before?
I think as scientists, particularly, we are prone to this techno-solutionism, no? The idea that technology and science will save us from all our madness and ills. And particularly now in AI, you hear that a lot, right? People who argue that, AGI will save us because AGI will know what's best and so on and so forth. And we just sit back and relax. We don't need to worry about anything because once we have AGI, everything will be solved. I think that's a fallacy. I think that's absolutely wrong because we need to stay in control of this technology, lest the technology controls us, or worse, the motivation of certain people will actually drive the technology in ways that nobody has chosen and nobody has any control over, no democratic control, no democratic oversight. So I think that's absolutely fundamental for us as scientists, but also as citizens, to be discussing those issues and not let that thing just go on unchecked. Because yes, in a few years' time, once these technologies are deployed, they cannot be rolled back. They cannot be put back into the box.
Sure. We are now in the direction of, not really thinking before doing it. So, let's hope we get our grip together.
What a fantastic talk. I wanted to ask about deriving models from data. It could be any field, physics, biology, whatever. I often get confused, like, how do you quantify something that's unknown? In my mind, it's not like something like anomaly detection, right? Which box to put in? If I get some new data, how do I actually quantify that's unknown? So somehow it always seems like that human beings are too egotistically driven, so we always want to interpret in our own way the model that exists. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes maybe the prior knowledge could be confusing. I don't know how to quantify actually unknown.
Do you mean unknown unknowns in scientific models or unknown unknown in AI more generally?
In generally scientific models, some new science that if we want to effectively discover.
Right. Yeah. I think the way AI, machine learning, let's say, interacts with the scientific method is a bit different than how it interacts with the rest of the world. Because in 2008, Chris Anderson wrote a very influential Wired article saying, pre-announcing the end of theory. So now we have data. This was when big data was a buzzword. It was before AI as we know it actually took off. But he was saying theory is irrelevant because we've got enough data. We don't need a model anymore. We can just exploit correlations and machine learning in order to learn things from the data themselves with no model. I think that's true, obviously, to an extent, because we're seeing it at work in all these AI systems that I've discussed. But in the sciences, particularly fundamental sciences, physics and so on, and also others, of course, we do have models of the world which have served us very well over 4 centuries. And those can and should enhance the workings of machine learning algorithms in order to, we put in the knowledge that we do have about the world so that the AI doesn't have to rediscover it for itself and can use the data to discover new things. Now, if you're asking, how do we actually go about making new discoveries in the age of data deluge that I described, that becomes a problem in and of itself because we are swamped by all of this data, and extracting from the data what matters becomes increasingly a problem of finding the right question to ask of the data. And that shifts a little bit the scientific paradigm. And so the answer to your question on the unknown unknown, I think we're still like, you are like still a little bit like the old drunkard, looking for the keys under the lamppost because that's where the light is. So we're asking the question that we know how to ask. I don't see in the immediate future a future in which the AI or the AGI will come back and saying this is the theory of the universe and we are not even able to understand it. I don't see that yet in the immediate future, although it might happen, but I don't see it. And so I think if there's anything surprising that comes out of the data, then we need to try and understand it. Let me give you actually one example about something surprising in my field that goes a little bit in that direction of the unknown unknown, which is the one thing I'm skipped. So this is work done by colleagues at Flatiron Institute in New York that claim that by training machine learning systems on very complex, huge computer simulations encompassing billions of galaxies, huge computer power, etc., and then showing this trained system one single galaxy, the AI is able to tell you how much dark matter there is in the universe, which is this diagonal line. The diagonal line is the AI is guessing correctly. So the paradox here is we've got this huge number of billions of galaxies that we described, and if this research is true, none of this matters because you just need one single galaxy to guess the thing that you care about, but nobody knows how and why this works. So that's unknown unknown. And so one of the things that we're doing with Gabi, not this Gabi, the other Gabi, is trying to understand, hey, is this real? Has the AI really understood something about the universe that we don't understand? Or is it a bug? I can tell you the answer later off the record.
Maybe first thing.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. I am coming from the humanities, just so you understand where the questions are coming from.
Thank you.
And I sort of have 2 questions. First one is when you're talking about big data, and you're talking about how ChatGPT, for example, is extremely successful at gathering a lot of data, right? I mean, there are hundreds of millions of people using it within the first 3 months, then there's a large amount of data. But humans are sort of different from the galaxy and dark matter in that you can generate a lot of big data about the galaxy and the galaxy stays the same. But when you generate data from humans, sometimes there are transgressions that you mentioned that happen inevitably just because of the way that our social and academic infrastructures and industrial infrastructures are intertwined. So I was wondering if you, from the perspective of the humanities, we think a lot about experience, and I like that we're talking about experience because we think of experience as not just something that is expressed, but also as something that is created in its observation. And so I was wondering if you could provide some enlightenment on ChatGPT, for instance, and whether you think it is gathering data. Is it for us to learn about AI, or is it about AI to learn about us?
Yes.
That's one question. Sorry.
Let me answer this one before we go any further. Otherwise, I'll forget the richness of your question. Thank you for that. It's a great question. I think it goes both ways. You're absolutely right. When the galaxies are out there, they don't care whether we observe them or not. They certainly don't change if we observe them, and they don't care about our analysis of their data. But particularly with this ChatGPT kind of model whereby users interact with the system changes in response as well to the user's input. There is a ChatGPTification of society, right? So the way ChatGPT replies, it's something that goes under your skin. And so at the same time, while ChatGPT is learning to be more helpful and more useful, meaning it's trying to please the customer and mold itself around your own preferences that you express in conversation, you're also being at the same time changed in the way you interact with those systems by the interaction itself. For example, this example that I gave earlier about if you take a text and then you get ChatGPT to polish it, it will change the frequency of certain words in what is a ChatGPT style. If you use it long enough, you might start to write like that yourself, because this is the way, especially if English is your second language, you will learn from the model. The model itself is being fine-tuned all the time through feedback with the users. But initially, at rollout, the model has been trained on vast corpora of data which have been hoovered up from the internet. And those data themselves, from which the model initially learns, are badly skewed and badly biased. For example, it knows about Wikipedia, it knows about Reddit, it knows about news, it knows about lots of things, books from Google Books, etc. But if you train a model on Reddit, for example, which is a forum that is heavily skewed towards white, male, conservative kind of people, you will pick up a certain kind of politics, if you like. And that also gets reflected back at interaction with the users. So there's not a moment in which I'm suggesting this technology is any way neutral. Let me be clear. This is not a neutral technology. It's a very powerful technology which cannot be deployed in a neutral way. And however you try to put guardrails in place, etc., it's going to have an impact. It's going to have, and oftentimes, an impact that nobody foresees, nobody has expected, nobody really wants even, perhaps. But it's having an impact. So yes, it goes both ways, very much. Because it's so personal. I hope it goes. You have the second question, though.
I do, but I don't want to take up time. I'm sure other people have questions. Maybe afterwards.
Maybe we'll come back.
Thank you. I'm Alesh Babbagea. I'm also from the humanities department. And you mentioned the biometric data, and basically you can identify people from basically any metrics, anything that you can measure on the persons. But in the European Union, we have the General Data Protection Regulation. And in case you are basically working with data, if you can identify a person with this, then you basically need to have an explicit assent, not only a simple assent, but that's distinguished within the GDPR. And so what I'm saying here is that basically all this profiling is basically illegal, because it is super difficult to get this explicit assent, because basically it has to be on the level of the user. It mustn't use the techniques of click fatigue or just to conditioning the assent on anything like that. So basically all of this data collection is illegal. So can you comment on this? And basically from these 2 points of view, one, that there's this much illegal stuff going on, but the other thing is also, which is I think interesting, is that the European Union managed to get this regulation working, which in my opinion makes sense. Also, for instance, it was analyzed by Luciano Floridi quite extensively in the deal from the December last year. And also there's the AI Act, which also makes sense. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I think the GDPR is from 2016, if I remember, right? And that was before all of this existed, right? So none of this was remotely foreseen. The GDPR, and like you mentioned, the AI Act is going in a direction, for example, of banning facial recognition outright, or certainly limiting it very strongly, except in very exceptional circumstances and so forth, which is definitely a step in the right direction. But the fundamental problem that I see with this technology is that its predicting and capabilities are so profound and so deep that it can de-anonymize data that are apparently harmless. So data that you would not guess could lead to privacy breaches. Actually, the interaction with these models can actually be de-anonymized to a level that essentially any data that's collected becomes a privacy breach potentially. And so because it's impossible to stop any data collection, it becomes also almost impossible to prevent that from happening because of how deep this goes. For example, there has been a recent study that shows that you take snippets of sentences that people put in forums, and those sentences don't have any explicit reference to where they're from, how old they are, what gender they are. They're just sentences that people say. Some have been actually anonymized, taking away meaningful words. And ChatGPT is able to reconstruct 84%, with 84% accuracy, things like gender, socioeconomic status, location in some cases, or sort of regional, from for example, the words that you use or the turn of phrases that you use. Very, very subtle clues that you would think impossible, yet it's working. So it's all pervasive, all I'm saying. So putting guardrails in place, absolutely fundamental, and the EU is doing much better than other places. But I think the fundamental problem is us as individuals. We're giving up too many data freely without thinking. You know, if you have a biometric watch, you're giving away your life, to who knows what, because then they get sold on, repackaged, resold. They're giving people know when you sleep, when you walk, when all of your life is in these watches. I find it absolutely scary that people do that. And even your mobile phone, if you haven't turned off all of the history in Google and so on, you can be traced in a very detailed fashion. So I think this is not because I want to be scaremongering, but I think it has to start bottom up, right? We give away our privacy in exchange for free services. Is that a good deal? I don't know if that's a good deal. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's a few more questions, then we can continue also in the... Okay. Okay, you...
Thank you. Hello. Okay, it was a great talk. Very inspiring. I am a mathematician here. And the first thing that comes to my mind when we talk about the singularity and solving the problem, and if we agree with that or not, or how do we feel about that? Yeah. There is an example from mathematics, the four-color theorem, which is, so the question for a mathematician would really boil down to ask, are we happy with the proof of the four-color theorem or not? I'm not sure everybody knows what is that, but this is a theorem that has been proved just by a computer. So it's something that a human cannot understand, but the computer says it's right. And so, and there are mathematicians that are okay with that, mathematicians which are not. And so, but my question is, I was wondering, maybe an AGI or a higher level of artificial intelligence would somehow also taking care of explaining the proof to us in such a case. I mean, I'm thinking about this particular example.
Yes.
Just wondering. Yes, I don't want a precise question, of course. Thank you.
Yes, I think we don't bother to explain Pythagoras' theorem to ants, do we? And so the argument is the AGI wouldn't bother with explaining it to us either, because that would be the differential between us and it. Now, joking aside, the essence of your question, I think, is very important. What does it mean to understand something, and what kind of, if there is a higher intelligence that is able to push science, mathematics beyond what human comprehension can do, should we follow? Can we follow? Is that even science if nobody can understand it truly? When Einstein came up with the theory of general relativity, and when it was proved by the observation of Eddington of the solar eclipse, the New York Times had a headline saying, "Stars not where they're supposed to be, theory Newton dethroned, and Einstein theory succeeds." And then there was a byline saying, a theory that only 12 wise men in the world can understand. Those relativity, and now we teach it to the graduate students, right? So there's an evolution of things. But I think the other question that you raised is a little bit about what we mean by intelligence. And of course, in mathematics, in science, we have a very clear idea of intelligence as in understanding, the kind of understanding we're talking about. But I think that the kind of intelligence that the AI community talks about, which has long been defined in terms, can a computer beat a person at chess? Yes. Can a computer beat a person at Go? Yes. Can a computer... This is a kind of intelligence, but of course humans have different kinds of intelligence, like emotional intelligence or other kind of intelligence that are not necessarily encapsulated in this one-dimensional metric. So I think it depends a little bit what we mean by AGI, and if an AGI is superior to us in the pure intellectual capacity is one thing, but if we're saying that the AGI is going to be able to supersede us in all the ways we are intelligent as humans, that's a more fragile question, I think.
Thank you.
But thank you for your question.
Do you want to last question? Yes. Okay, the last question.
Can I just say, Gabi, how exciting it is to be in an audience with mathematicians, people from the humanities. It's wonderful. Thank you. It's a great mix.
Oh, thank you. My name is Milos. I'm coming from Instrumentation Technologies. I have very short questions. How do you see what are now open challenges in AI? How do you see that? And how do you see also, let's say, a future of AI?
Open challenges at the technical level, you mean?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So I think, the open challenges, in my opinion, are in making those huge models that we talked about, ChatGPT, etc., making them smaller, in a sense. Is it possible to achieve the same level of performance with smaller models that don't require so many data, don't require so many parameters, don't require so much compute? Is that a meaningful thing that we could do, achieve similar level of performances, but with much smaller resources? But that requires understanding how those models do what they do, because it's not clear to anybody really why ChatGPT actually, people understand how it works on a technical level, but why is it past a certain degree of complexity or number of parameters and so on, you get all of these features, all these capabilities that are not present at lower levels of complexity as measured by the number of parameters. So if one understood that, I think one could meaningfully understand these models better and deploy them better also, and understand their fragilities as well as their capabilities. The future of AI, again, it depends a little bit if we're talking about science. I think certainly in my domain, in Gabi's domain, I guess all the sciences that have data, except for the very theoretical ones, although even in the theoretical science, theoretical branches like theoretical physics, I see developments that use AI in an interesting fashion, for example, to explore the space of functions, of certain kind of functions in a more smart way, should we say. All the sciences that have data, I think, will have to use, not just benefit, will have to use AI in some way or another because of this data explosion problem that I talked about, and compressing this data down into meaningful scientific answers will require a combination perhaps of AI, machine learning, and more traditional statistical tools, which certainly in our field is very, very powerful and is doing things that are otherwise impossible. For society, I think it very much depends on what happens in the next few years, whether we see this dominance of the big oligopolies, the big Silicon Valley-based behemoth, whether this becomes solidified and unshakable is going to be one trajectory. If that somehow changes, if the ecosystem becomes more varied and there is less monolithic, just few players on the market, it's going to be a very different society that we're going to build. This will require robust regulation, which we don't see the sign of in the US at the moment, quite the contrary. But it also requires democratic input and societal oversight. We need to say what we want. How do we want to deploy these capabilities? It's Arthur C. Clarke famously said that any advanced enough technology is indistinguishable from magic. Now we have technology that looks magic, not just to us, but one generation ago, if you had told people, your phone's going to be able to do this, this, and that, that's science fiction. Now we have that magic in our pocket. The question is it going to be white magic or black magic? That's for us to decide.
Great. So let's thank Roberto on this note for a great talk.
Thank you.